I'm Dick Lambert, and my claim to fame is that I flew in the Dambusters. I joined the Air Force, well, the raid was in May 1943, and I joined the Air Force in June 43. I didn't know then that I would meet the Dambusters about 15 years later. Anyway, I was eventually called up, and after the initial training, of course, I conflicted with the D-Day landings, and as the Air Force didn't have so many casualties as they expected, a lot of us were made redundant, and I became a flight engineer for a little while. I became redundant again, became a flight mechanic, and that's where the story picks up with my time in the Air Force. But around about 1945, I think it must have been, I guess are there many service people here? Well, I was going to say, you know what a pay parade is like. It's usual chaos. You march up to the table, salute, pick up your money and disappear. Well, I picked up my money, and after lunch went back to the billet, and counting my money I realised I'd been overpaid. Well, what do? Do I put it in my pocket, or do I go and see somebody about it? Anyway, my conscience got the better of me. I went to see the paying officer, who was delighted to see me, and handshakes all round. And he then said, well, I'll take you into the group captain, as you're such an honest young airman. So I went and had a chat with the group captain for quite a long time, bearing in mind I was redundant, and but I had signed on for 3 years as a flight mechanic. But I did hope to resume training one day, but of course that seemed to be very unlikely at the time. So suddenly he said, what can I do for you? I said, well, I want to go back to flying. And within 6 weeks I was on a refresher course, and that's where I went on to, with my flight mechanic working, went to 46 MU up at Lossiemouth. And on the MU was a lot of aircraft in long-term storage, and one of them was a Dambuster. So I took a lot of pictures of that, which I've subsequently lost, unfortunately. And well, okay, then that was 1940, what did I say, about 1950 odd. I finally went back to flying training, and my first squadron was 101 Squadron, which was, if anybody would know the history of radio countermeasures, was a squadron that had fantastic casualties because the Germans could home on to all the radio countermeasures. Later on, I was on 97 Squadron, and I went on leave one day, came back, and there on the airfield at Hemswell, there was 4 Lancasters. I thought, wow, I'd like to fly one of those. And of course I was lucky enough to fly in the film, The Dambusters, which became quite a good, popular, well-known film. And about the film, we flew all the raids, or all the flying training areas like Windermere and Derwent Water and all those sort of places. We actually did the film, the circuits, as it was. We used the same briefing rooms, the same style. Everything was as was the real thing. The only thing was that, of course, we didn't get shot at. So it was a very popular film, and I've got a book of the film, and if anybody wants to have a quick look at it, you're welcome. I've got a book of the pilot's notes of the Lancaster, and it's very similar. Actually, it's a funny coincidence. The Lancaster in Western Springs was painted with the letters SR as the squadron letters, and that was the squadron letters of 101 Squadron. So that's my claim to fame. If anybody wants to talk about the Lancaster, I'll be pleased to talk to you about it. As I was on the ground, of course, I worked on the Lancaster, flew in the Lancaster, flew for the film. Unfortunately, I would like to have met Burt Munro, always thinking I must go down and see him, but then I didn't want to intrude on his privacy in those days. And of course, he died almost just about 6 months ago, didn't he? Yeah. And he got his medals back. So I guess I wouldn't have seen him. But the aeroplane I represented was Mickey Martin, who was an Australian, and I believe he became a very senior officer in Australia, in the Australian Air Force. Mickey Martin was represented by Bill Kerr, who had a fantastic range of very rude jokes. Yeah. Anybody want to ask any questions about the Lancaster and so on?
Well, the low-level flying that you were doing in the film, was that quite different from what you would normally do in Squadron?
Oh yes, we were at high-level bombing, and that was at 20,000 odd feet. And getting a Lancaster, as a young pilot, there's a Lancaster, go and fly it. And by the way, do some low flying. And of course, that was the way it went. And flying over Derwent Water, there was a good picture of me actually a little bit lower than the raid, which ended up at I think 60 feet, was it, or 30? Anyway, at that height, the water gets a bit ruffled by the propellers, so they didn't use that shot. Yeah.
So, how much flying did you do for the film, if you can remember?
What they actually used wasn't very much. We did quite a lot of flying around, positioning and so on, taxiing shots and that sort of thing. If they'd had telephones, they could have communicated with the people on the ground. The flying shots over Derwent Water in England, I guess most of you will know the Lake Windermere and places like that in England. Well, Derwent Water near Sheffield has got two towers exactly the same as the raid or the Mona Dam. So they had the AA there to say what the weather was like and okay, come and fly. So they were never really tuned up. They wasted a lot of space in filming there. Yeah.
What were the cameras they used? Because the cameras back in those days were big, huge lens with big round.
Well, that's right. Yes.
So what did
they
they
had
use on the aircraft to film?
Well, they had the 4 Lancasters. They had a Wellington, and they used a Mosquito once or twice because they actually did in the film. And they took the doors off a Varsity, and the chaps were just leaning out at the side. It wasn't ideal. Incidentally, on that, the Varsity Hercules engines spew out a lot of oil, and I was right behind it one night when they did the searchlight shots, and I realised I couldn't see. And there's a place called Langham. It's a disused airfield. This was at night, so I landed there and missed a lot of haystacks, and my engineer got out and cleaned the windscreen. We took off again and went back. Enjoyed the film. Yeah. I'm told we upset some poachers. Yeah.
When you were coming across the dams, what speed were you going at? And you told me before, but I forget.
What did I tell you? I can't remember. It would have been, well, probably in miles an hour or whatnot, but it would have been a couple of hundred, I suppose, 200.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we've actually measured the distance now between the tip of your propellers and the top of the dam, when you went through there on that picture.
Yeah.
It was 23 feet.
Yeah.
So
it was
exciting,
low.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Wasted 20 feet.
Yeah. Mm. Without the one that they actually used in the film was don't forget there was other pilots, not just me, but on this particular one, I did it really low, but there wasn't any real direction of what they wanted to do. There's a film, well, in the raid, Gibson formatted above Martin to distract the ACAC. Well, they could have easily shown that if they wanted to, but they didn't. But anyway, and then there was when Maudsley was actually shot down, I thought, well, I'll do it anyway. So that's why I was low, and then I dived down and then climbed up. And as you can see in the film with me coming up, that's supposed to represent when he crashed and he was talking, I'm okay, but he wasn't. So there was a lot of waste of time.
Do you see your actual face in the film?
No. As I say, I was with supposed to be Martin,
Yeah.
and Bill Kerr is an Australian, so of course too, and he was quite funny to work with, but he would sit in the cockpit, and my engineer would start up the engines and would take it out of the way. Later on, Richard Todd actually did do a bit of taxiing.
Oh, right.
Did they modify the 4 aircraft that you used for filming with the bomb doors gone? And
No, they did 3. They took the doors off 3 of them and put that big bump on, which was far too big for the. I mean, if you know it, the bomb almost fits into the bomb bay, but did stick out a bit.
They removed the mid-upper too, didn't they?
Pardon?
Did they not remove the mid-upper turret as well?
That's right. Yes, they took the mid-upper turret
And
away,
they did that on
and they
all 4 aircraft?
used the hydraulics and services for rotating the bomb. Well, that way. Yeah.
Dick, there is another link with New Zealand on the aircraft you flew, because Mickey Martin's rear gunner was a chap called Len Chambers,
Oh yes.
and Len is sort of the forgotten man of the Dambusters raid as far as Kiwis are concerned. So he was drafted in from 75 Squadron
Yes.
to become Mickey Martin's
Oh yes.
rear gunner. And he only did another raid or 2 after that, on 617, and
Well, you know that most of the crews of 617 were wiped out a few months later on a raid over the Kiel Canal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been back to Petwood?
No, I haven't.
Lately?
No.
I was there last
No.
year. They had one of the bombs sitting there, the casings of it.
Oh, yes.
Sitting outside the
Yes.
office.
I have seen it. Well, they rescued one from Chisel Beach or somewhere, and I've seen it in Duxford or Gosford, one of the two. Yeah, it's not that big.